Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining so promptly. My name is Ben Clark. I'll be leading today's webinar. We're just going to give everyone another minute or so to join the webinar before we get going. So thank you for your patience. For anyone who's just joined, good morning. Thank you for arriving. We're just going to wait for a few more people to join up before we get cracking. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on to this session on getting started with QR codes powered by GS1. This is the fourth webinar in the series, and having already discussed some of the exciting use cases from these QR codes in previous sessions, in this webinar, we're going to focus on what you need to consider when looking to implement them. Now, we're not going to be talking about the technical aspects of how you construct your QR codes or barcode sizes or resolvers. You might be relieved to hear. We'll be talking more around the planning side of things in this webinar. My name is Ben Clark. I'm Head of Standards and Education at GS1 UK, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. And I'm happy to be joined by Craig Stobie, Global Sector Development Director for Domino UK. And Domino is a leading global provider of printing and labelling solutions for various industries. So it's great to have Craig here today to provide his insight and practical advice for businesses embarking on this journey. So thank you for coming along today.
Thank you, Ben.
So just to let you know, we'd love to hear from you guys during this webinar. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the functionality by now. So if you do have any questions to ask, please use the chat functionality and we'll endeavour to answer them at the end of the webinar. And we will be recording this session as well. I'm sure you're all aware who we are by now, but just to quickly recap, GS1 is a not-for-profit member organisation. What we do is we work with our members, industry, regulators, other stakeholders to try and solve problems. We do that through standards. It all started with the barcode 50 years ago, but we've got standards around electronic data interchange, radio frequency identification, and more besides. Now, back to the topic at hand. We're not going to go over all the mechanics of how QR codes powered by GS1 work. We covered much of that in previous webinars, and we've got a load of information on our website. So I really do encourage you to check that out. What I will say is when you're implementing our QR codes, it involves more than just, sticking a QR code on your packaging. It's more than just getting a URL from marketing and whacking that symbol somewhere on your product. Normal, typical, bog standard QR codes can only do one thing. So it's relatively straightforward to implement. You don't really need to give it much thought, in all honesty. However, because of the different data that QR codes powered by GS1 can encode, because of the different ways you can connect to online content, there are a few considerations that need to be made to fully ensure that you benefit from this exciting solution. Now, much of what you do will be driven by what you actually want to use our QR codes for. So there's so many different use cases that can be realized, both online via smartphones and apps, but also offline as per a traditional barcode. Now, once you know what you want to use these QR codes for, it will shape how they're implemented, who needs to be involved in the project, and also what data needs to be encoded within the QR itself. Now, as you saw on a previous slide, QR codes powered by GS1 can contain a domain name and then at least a GTIN. And sometimes that's enough. You've identified the type of product, so you'll now be able to link it to some digital content via that product. You could wrap some accessibility functionality around that QR code. So now you're able to aid the blind or partially sighted. You could inform consumers how and where to recycle that product. And of course, you'll be able to zap that QR code at point of sale as well. But if you want to take advantage of some of the more advanced opportunities that QR codes powered by GS1 can give you, then you need to start encoding more granular or dynamic data. So for example, if you want to improve traceability across your organization, if you want to do more targeted recalls, then you'd look at encoding the batch number within your QR codes. If you wanted to start doing waste prevention or better inventory management, you can encode best before dates or use by dates within your QR code. And of course, if you wanted to do digital deposit return schemes or even do better authentication and personalization, you might need to say is very much this specific product. Actually go down to the instance and identify that one particular product. So you could put a serial number within your QR code. So it very much depends on what you need to do as to what goes into the QR code. Now, of course, if the data in the QR never changes, the QR doesn't need to change. It's therefore relatively straightforward to print on your packaging. However, printing QR codes that change for each batch run or even each instance of product obviously requires more complex implementations and also additional considerations. Of equal importance as to what goes into the QR code is where does that QR code take a user when they scan it via the camera on their smartphone or app. So what the QR links to is up to the brand owner to determine what information or experience is best for marketing objectives, meeting consumer needs, is dependent on the product type, the company, the market. I mean, basically QR codes powered by GS1 can link to any digital content. So this can be your own website, can be a third-party website like YouTube or a trusted review site. It could even open up an app when scanned or open a PDF if that's what floats your boat. It can be absolutely any online content. You can even do all of the above if you implement a dynamic landing page like we got here, where you can manage multiple links to online content in one go. Now, ownership of this content may reside, in fact, probably does reside across different functions across your business. So obviously, all those functions will need to be consulted when you embark on a project to implement QR codes powered by GS1. Now, this is a big question. Which products do I start with? So blanket adoption across your entire product range probably isn't feasible. It might be, but probably isn't feasible. So there are some questions that you can ask to help you prioritize your focus and ensure implementation is more manageable. Quite a simple one. Do you have space for the QR code? Obviously, some products or packages have more space available on them than others. So creating a list of products which can readily fit a QR code will really help support or determine where you need to start. Something to really bear in mind here is there's going to be a period of transition where not all point of sale scanners can deal with these QR codes. So there is going to be a requirement to have a QR code and plaque as well as an EA encode. So you need to bear that in mind. You will need to have space for both barcode symbols for a period of time. Of course, you could always target products which are already using typical non-GS1 QR codes. I've got to be careful how my use of the word standard there. So if you've already got room for a QR code on products, it seems like a logical progression. Well, let's focus on those ones. Let's take that bog standard QR code and improve it with QR codes powered by GS1. We've already got space on pack to do that. Are you launching any new products? So that offers a great opportunity to include QR codes from the start. So not only can you factor it into the artwork design, but then you can think about the marketing content, which is really helpful to successful product launches. So that can actually inform your decisions, and you start getting better insights and better promotion about your products from the off for new product launches. And on a similar ilk, if you're changing any product packaging in the near future, you may not want to change it just for the QR codes, but you've already got artwork in the pipeline that you're going to update, then maybe it's a logical progression to introduce the QR codes at that point. And one thing to bear in mind, of which Craig knows all too well, is not all equipment is capable of printing QR codes from the off. Some can, some might require a software update. But you need to factor this in. If you've got products which are already good to go, you've got the capability on the production lines, and then focus on those first. And then if you're going to refresh any technology in the next 2, 3, 5 years, build that into your plan as to what products you look at further down the line. And this is where our solution partners, with their industry and technology expertise, absolutely come into their own. They know this stuff inside out, so you should be plugging into these guys early into your conversations in the project. Now, when thinking about space on pack, it's important to bear in mind that GS1 has standards and best practice in place to ensure that all stakeholders can utilize a QR code as intended. So we provide guidance as to how big, what color, where to place QR codes on pack to ensure they work. Now, if you're unable to comply with any of these standards, you best, start with a different product type. Focus on a product where you are able to meet all the compliance around barcodes. Because yes, it's important that these QR codes can scan by consumer smartphone. But also, if we want these QR codes to scan at point of sale, they need to be big enough. They need to be good enough quality. They need to be in a logical place as well, so that they can scan and not cause any problems across the retailer's ecosystem. So we're able to help with this. We can provide guidance. We can speak to you guys. We've got lots of how-to and videos and stuff like that. But we can also check barcode quality as well, as per a number of our solution providers. So it's really important to ensure that your barcodes not just scan by smartphones, which is very important, but ultimately we'll want these barcodes to scan at point of sale as well. So you need to factor in the QA process as well when implementing these QR codes on pack. Implementing QR codes powered by GS1 is going to require brand owners, manufacturers, retailers, solution providers, all to work really closely together. But it's also going to require close collaboration across a business. So who makes the decision to implement QR? Who's required to take action? Who's impacted by the changes? So there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach across all businesses. Regardless of who's involved, where their input's required, it's important to identify as early as possible all the stakeholders that are vital to the planning and deployment of the business changes required to implement QR codes. We've just got a small selection of people listed on this slide who could be involved. There's actually a much longer list in one of the documents we're going to provide access to attendees of this webinar. It tells you who could be involved and why and what inputs might be expected of them. But as you've seen on the previous slides, these QR codes, they include the data, which is used for production information used by dates, includes getting this stuff on artwork. You need to involve brand owners, potentially regulatory. You need to involve IT, web services. It touches quite varied parts across an organization. If you're in a small organization, it might be you. You might be doing all of the above. But a larger organization will obviously need to collaborate across all the different functions within their business. And last but certainly not least, you should be asking yourself, when do I start transitioning to QR codes powered by GS1? So each company will have their own business needs that determine when they initiate the project. So we've listed some of the most important or most common catalysts for change, I should say here. It might be either the carrot or the stick, which prompts you into action. But we'd recommend that you don't hang about. With so much to consider about different use cases, data, packaging, printers, web content, there really is no time like the present. There's lots of moving parts for this. So we suggest you start looking into under the hood, doing an audit of what you've got and your products and your technology capabilities now, sooner rather than later, to really take advantage of QR codes powered by GS1. Now, GS1 UK has standards, guidelines, we've got training, we've got in-person support available to really get you on this journey, to give you a helping hand. But we're also really lucky to have a network of partners who can assist our members with all the different aspects of implementation. So with that in mind, I think it is time to hand over to Craig.
Thank you, Ben. Do you know what? Excellent timing, it seems. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity to present. Unfortunately, we're not taking a deeper dive into the technical side, so this is really about a very top level understanding of how you can get started on the journey. More importantly, benefiting from that journey. It's not just about going down this path. You know, what are the potential benefits of deploying QR codes powered by GS1? Now, Domino has been very active in the deployment of 2D codes and serialization for over 20 years. It's something I've done for a very long time. We've done a lot of work in fiscal recovery and legislative initiatives like EU FMD, the European Falsified Medicines Directive. Since I started in the industry very many years ago, I've seen an evolution in product identification, and this has accelerated significantly in the last few years. It started with simple human readable information, as you see on the left here, such as batch and expiry. We've then seen a more granular identification for certain products. This is especially where product divergence is an issue, grey market issues, or falsification, so often high value products or products that are open to falsification. So what we've seen is the implementation and widespread adoption of sort of more granular systems, but now it's moving and accelerating into the use of machine readable codes, specifically 2D dimensional 2D codes. And these are being used by a number of stakeholders for a number of different outcomes. We've used our experience to deploy 2D codes internally for the benefit of our own customers. And actually, it's always hard to pick an example of a two-dimensional code that we're allowed to share. So actually, I've used one of our own internal ones. So this is one of the Domino fluids that we use. We've actually used our learnings to deploy QR codes internally. So this is actually enables all of our customers on all of our fluids and spares to manage things like instructional videos, manuals, simplify stock management, make reordering quicker, easier, and error-free. So again, for our own customers, we're seeing the benefits already of deploying those 2D codes. And next slide, please, Ben. We are seeing, as I say, we're seeing these changes coming through, but actually these changes are accelerating massively. And we've got three big global initiatives driving this change. First, there's the focus on the circular economy. And this is moving away from the sort of make, take, throw away to a concept of remove, ideally. You know, we've seen some things with things like labelless initiatives in Asia and moving across into Europe to reduce, or worst case, if you can't remove or reduce, to at least make sure that you're recycling. The second is the acceleration of the digital economy, connected packaging, and the digitization of information. So we're seeing things like digital twins for packaging. The pandemic probably accelerated it probably a decade in a couple of years. So again, it's really moving quickly here. And there's another concept called Moore's Law, which you may have heard of. And this is about the accessibility, the barrier of entry of digitalization of information. It used to be only the scope of big organizations, whereas now access to computers, access to cameras and vision and readability of codes means actually that's really it. The digitization of information is really accessible to anybody. These are both interdependent and connected. So the digital economy is helping support the circular economy and vice versa. So there is a nice flow between those two areas. But both of them are underpinned by this third change. And this is this huge increase in the use and focus on 2D codes, especially QR, and QR powered by GS1 is where we're seeing the standard. You know, again, it gives that global interoperability that's needed in these digital economies and connected packaging systems. Next slide, please, Ben. However, there's always a however, isn't there? However, not all QR codes are equal. Putting a QR code on a pack doesn't mean job done. Actually, far from it. There are a number of different data elements that you can put in there. So just put in a static GTIN and URL, of course, will enable some consumer engagement, and we're seeing this in some brands, but including variable information and dynamic data. So again, becoming more granular as you go down. So for example, adding an expiry date unlocks all sorts of benefits from the manufacturing process, through logistics and distribution, at point of sale, especially with things like dynamic pricing. So again, as more organizations and retailers move to electronic shelf labels, it allows for very short shelf products, for that process to be managed very quickly. Also, areas where there's hyperinflation, that dynamic pricing really adds some benefits. But that only comes in if you've got that data element within the QR code at the point of sale. Also, things like batch really helps manage things like recalls, if there should be a recall, or again, just granularity of recalls. At the moment, if there is a recall, there's a potential that you might have to recall thousands of products. You know, if you add a serial number, there's a potential you might have to recall 3, because you know when the problem happened, you recall the one in front of it just to be safe, and you recall the one after it just to be safe. So again, it gets it a lot more granular. Digital deposit return schemes, for example, are really enabled by the use of a data-rich QR code. So the advice that we always have is, when you are building your model, think about the data elements that you're including within the code. Think about what the outcomes you want to achieve and work back from there. Don't start with the code and work forwards. You need to think about what you're trying to improve, what you're trying to access, what you're trying to unlock, and all of those different benefits. Next slide, please, Ben. And this is another however, I'm afraid. Great. So you're going to build this very data-rich QR code. Fantastic. You can have lots of different data elements, and they're really powerful. You know, it unlocks all sorts of benefits. But there are 5 key areas which need careful thought. They need to be looked at separately, but also consideration needs to be given to the interdependency of those 5 different areas, because they do interconnect. Next slide, please, Ben. So let me take the first 2. So as I say, it's really nice to have a data-rich dynamic QR code. However, adding more data and then just compressing it by making the cell size really small, by reducing the error correction level, to reduce the physical side of the code to fit in your packaging real estate, can have some real readability impacts on your supply chain. This is further compounded in the fact that you probably, depending on what scanners you're using, what cameras you're using, you might not pick that up in the manufacturing process. You might not pick it up in the logistics and distribution process. So it might be weeks or months after the product is manufactured before you realize you've got a problem. And then everything from that point onwards has been a problem. So it could cause a huge problem. So again, our advice is, although it can be quick and easy to adjust these areas and just say, well, we'll just make the code smaller, actually, longer term, it can really have some significant implications. Next slide, please, Ben. Now, the next 2, packaging, real estate and physical aspects like shape and materials, very hard to influence. Again, that approval process can take months, if not years. So changing these is a long and complicated process. So it's not just as simple as saying, do you know what, we're going to make the bottle bigger, or we're going to make the closure bigger, or we're going to make the carton bigger or smaller. We're going to change the artwork very, very quickly. If you've got hundreds or thousands of SKUs, it's not a straightforward process, and again, can take a long time. So again, careful thought needs to be given to any changes and what that might take. Next slide, please. So the quick win clearly is data content, but it needs to be balanced with the data-rich environment and following the GS1 syntax. So we need to make sure we've got all of the right construct for the code, but we also need to make sure that we're constructing the right way. So don't perhaps take your usual data elements and just put them into a code and end up with this huge code. You know, if you have a URL, for example, don't make it 40 characters. Think about how you can reduce that and still make it smart. Be careful about quishing, of course. That's phishing using QR codes. So it needs to be a balance between being long enough so that people are happy with the provenance of it, but it's not so long that it's making your QR code huge. Think about batch code lengths. Think about serial number constructs. Again, there's lots of ways using alphanumeric to get a very, very secure serial number that might be 8 or 9 or 10 characters rather than 20 characters in numeric. Again, it just takes that little bit of thought at the early stage to make sure you've got the best possible construct for those 2D codes. We've been printing 2D codes, lots of sectors, aerospace and lots of the regulated industries for 20 years. Use those lessons. You know, this isn't a new project. There's lots of industries who've been down this path, who've learned lots of lessons. And getting this right early is key to the success of a project. And it's the quickest way to realize those effective outcomes as well. Next slide, please, Ben. Thank you. We talked about that 20 years of experience. One thing that we've learned in those couple of decades is the time it takes to fully embed this sort of initiative is usually underestimated, often significantly. If Sunrise 2027 is an aspiration, then most companies should have started last year, possibly 2 years ago. So again, it's not start in a couple of years. You know, if you want to be ready in 4 or 5 years, you have to start now. And hopefully this chart will just give a little bit. It's illustrative, so please don't take it as a Gantt chart. It is really just illustrative in the sort of things that we need. It's important, as we can show here, it's important to start with the right people. Senior sponsorship is a fundamental, but also a team made up of a sort of holistic business functions across the your business. And again, Ben's sort of pointed to some of those job titles that might be there. We can often tell how successful a project is going to be with a 2D deployment based on the range of job titles around the table. It is not an engineering or manufacturing problem, and it won't be solved by buying some equipment or changing your packaging. This is a truly holistic project. If you press forward, please, Ben. So you've got your people, you've got your team. So what does that team work on? And actually, developing a clear plan usually requires a number of focus work streams. And I've included a few here. It's not an exhaustive list, but it does show a few of them. And they should be done in parallel, because again, if you do them in series, you'll take 3 years just developing the plan. And so it includes things like understanding the physical production lines. You know, often, even if you've got the same equipment, no two production lines are sometimes the same, or the equipment's not the same, or the MES level's not the same. We should think about the range of artwork that you've got, the materials used, different materials from different suppliers, the supply chain, and what do the stakeholders need? That can take over a year just to really understand what that landscape looks like. You could hit the next button, please, Ben. So then think about deploying, and these are the first deployments. You can start that before the plan's fully formed, and it's important to have a clear vision of what outcomes you're looking to achieve, and what the range of solutions needed to enable this, and what the initial deployment plan looks like. One piece of advice, which might sound a little bit counterintuitive, is companies often start with their best lines. I would recommend and advocate start with your worst line, because that's where the lessons are. And actually, it's usually a Pareto process. So 80% of your products will take 20% of the time. 20% of the products will take 80% of the time. So start with that difficult 20%. You know, that's where you've got more time as well. And also consider your contract packers, third-party logistics, you know, other players within your ecosystem, because again, they're important. What part do they play? How do they fit in? And then, of course, that's probably a couple of years' work. And then it's time to sort of copy, paste, and roll it out across the rest of the products and your ecosystem. Thank you, Ben. Next slide, please. One question that I always get asked is, how much is it going to cost per product or per line or per site or per organization? And without trying to give a political answer or avoid the question, it really does depend. I mean, there's a number of different factors. What I've tried to do here is benchmark it against relative cost. So thinking about different aspects and what the relative cost of those will be. So if you think you need to change something, there's different ways to achieve the outcome. For example, subject close to my heart, if you have a challenging material, then maybe changing the print technology might seem a higher initial cost. But actually, longer term, it can be a much better value option, for an example. Another example would be investing in training and best practice techniques can be cheaper and much quicker than replacing a production line and engineering out inherent challenges by replacing the whole system. So actually, if you've got a line that's difficult, actually, rather than replace the whole line that might take 2 years and cost millions of pounds or euros, how about just investing in the people working on that line? How about making them best in class for what they're doing? Next and final slide, please, Ben. So just a couple of summary points here. So understanding the outcomes you want to achieve and the details, the real granular details of your landscape and ecosystem are key. The approach needs to be broad, and most importantly, the whole solution is only as good as the worst part. That will be the limiting factor. That will set the bar for how good your whole process is that worst component within your whole system. It's also not a short-term project or a campaign. This is a holistic and fundamental business step change, and it needs the right approach. It needs involvement from all internal stakeholders right across the business from a range of different disciplines to make sure that you're looking at it properly. The good news is there are huge benefits available. It's not just about the pain. There are many opportunities for gains. It has the opportunity and the potential to transform supply chains, consumer experiences, and sustainability initiatives for a very, very long time, realizing huge number of positive outcomes. That was it. Thank you. And I think we've got hopefully a few minutes for questions.
Great. Thank you ever so much for that, Craig. Really helpful, insightful stuff. One of the questions that has cropped up, and I think you touched on it earlier, is you may not discover problems with your QR code till further down the line. What's the best way to check that it works? You're not going to experience any problems with external stakeholders.
There's a couple of things that you need to do, and again, we've learned this from experience. One is making sure that you're checking codes within the factory. And the good news, it's good news and bad news. The good news is with machine readable codes, human readable is open to interpretation. It can be an emotional topic, but it's all sort of a perspective. Machine readable codes are binary. They are good or they are bad. You can't detune the camera to say, actually, I'm just going to turn the sensitivity down and let production go. So there's a number of lines where we've deployed machine readable codes and the reject levels go up. And that's not because the line's got any worse or it's harder to print those codes. It's because actually for the first time, you can see what the rejects truly are. So it's about making sure you approach it properly. But the other thing is making sure that you're using the right material, ink combination. There's some standards called blue wool standards, for example. Does the ink fade over time? That was something we saw in falsified medicines. What you want to make sure is the code is as robust as the product is. If you're producing something that maybe has a 2 or 3 year shelf life, make sure the code's going to last that long, because it's no point being fantastic grade A in the factory if it's unreadable by the time it potentially still at the end of its lifespan in the field.
Great, thank you. I guess you need to bear in mind the scanning technology with the different sort of dual aspect of these QR codes. Yeah, we're going to scan them with our phones, but down the line, we also want these retailers to scan them at point of sale. So you can think about the different technology and ensuring these barcodes are good enough quality to meet every sort of use case. So,
exactly, and it might be, and not to labour the point, but it might seem like an additional cost within the factory, but it's much cheaper to catch any bad codes in the production line. The higher up the production line you can catch them, the cheaper it is than it is to catch them when they're at a retailer's and they're on a pallet and there's 20,000 of them.
Yeah. And with that in mind, scanning's one thing, but the GS1, we always recommend the process of verification, which will give you a definitive grade on whether your barcode is good enough quality or not. We've had a question come in from Harish. So is it advisable to consider using accessible QR codes when you're thinking to implement QR codes?
Absolutely. One of the big benefits for QR codes and machine readable codes is the positive impact it has on consumer experience, particularly for anybody that's vision impaired. It unlocks a whole number of features, and also for things like allergens and dietary requirements. Suddenly, you don't need to be an expert and an encyclopedia and read 50 ingredients, because actually, you'll be able to access that much more. So yes, it is. There's a number of different ways. There are some proprietary accessible QR formats. If the QR code itself is in the right orientation, and it's clearly presented, actually it should be possible to access much more easily most QR codes. But there are, you know, extended and more proprietary accessible QR codes out there as well. So yeah, definitely worth consideration. Again, think about the outcomes, think about the products, think about the stakeholders and the value chain, and whether that's a benefit.
Thank you, Craig. And Harris, you may be interested, as well as some other attendees. We have got a webinar coming up discussing accessibility. So on the 8th of October, one of our solution partners, Zappa, will be talking about the benefits to the partially and blind sighted to using GS1, QR codes powered by GS1. So please come along to that one. We talked about not all QR codes are created equally. You have that lovely slide with the different data you can encode. I mean, from your experience of speaking to both retailers and brands, is there any sort of common data which retailers are requiring or brands are favouring in your experience?
Batch and expiry are key. So we always tend to work and in static. So static is, you know, a million codes. Every SKU is exactly the same. And then you have sort of variable information where it might be 10,000 of the same because it's the same batch. And then you've got dynamic where every single, you know, the batch of one concept. I think variable is the way that retailers are going at the moment. So batch and expiry. For things like waste management, it's fantastic. When we get to things like digital deposit return schemes and managing waste streams, going fully serialized absolutely really unlocks that quite easily. But I think anywhere beyond variable, and it's quite interesting, we're seeing some global initiatives where they've gone from static to variable to dynamic, and you know, it depends on the category, but some are not, you know, again, it's not all products going at the same speed. So we're seeing some meats are going from variable to dynamic, and we're seeing some short shelf products moving from static to variable.
Thank you, Craig. Masoom has asked, where can we get an extensive list of all internal stakeholders involved? So I put up a slide, and Craig mentioned the different parties that might need to be involved in these projects as well. So we're able to provide lots of different resources of how to create your syntax, so what data goes in the QR code, how you connect to online data. But we've also got a really handy guideline about implementing QR codes for use at point of sale and getting started with these projects, who needs to be involved, what data considerations. So we'll provide full access to that document, which details all the stakeholders, as well as some other stuff as well. On our website, we've got the Knowledge Hub, which has got a load of resources dedicated to QR codes, and there'll be more coming over the coming weeks and months as well to help you guys on your implementation journeys. Sujith asked, is typical QR code encoded with GS1 digital link considered as GS1 QR code? So the great news about QR codes powered by GS1 is it's just your standard QR code. It's the one that you see on business cards and magazines, cufflinks and everything else. It is a QR code that people have been printing for many, many years now. What we've done is just change the data that is encoded within that QR code to bring all this extra functionality, all these additional use cases. Just to clear up some naming confusion, and it's probably our fault, we have a barcode called a GS1 QR code. You are not using a GS1 QR code to do all this wonderful stuff we're talking about here. That is a barcode which is encoded with, you know, very specific information in a very specific way. Please do not use a GS1 QR code. You are using a normal standard QR code which has the GS1 digital link encoded within it. If you're not sure about that, please reach out to us. Again, we can provide you lots of information on it. It does get a little bit confusing, but what you are printing is a bog standard QR code with our exciting new syntax in there to enable all these additional use cases.
And to add to that, at the risk of going full geek, the traditional QR codes have a URL and then some data, normally in the usual GS1 application identifier format. The new GS1 QR code, or QR code powered by GS1, I should say, is actually a URI, and a URL is a URI, but lots of other URIs. There are lots of other potential URIs. So actually the syntax changes slightly. It's only very subtle, but again, it will make them easy to scan at point of retail, because the retail scanners are gearing up for the URI format rather than URL with data strings. Apologies if that bit geeky. Reach out to me if you need more information on that.
Great, thank you. I've probably got time for one more question. So Darren's asked, will there be an option to customize the landing page and change the text on some of the buttons in the near future, change the brand colors? So this goes back to the slide, deciding what online content you link to. And yes, you can have a landing page with multiple links on it, and that information is dynamic. You can change it when you need to. To implement these sorts of things, there's different ways you can go about it. So we've got solution providers on our website who offer proprietary solutions which enable people to link through to multiple bits of content. And sometimes you're limited by their skin. Sometimes there's some element of customization. You are also able to implement your own resolver. So we provide our members with access to resolver standards, which means you can come up with your own landing page if you have got the technology capabilities within your organization. So speak to your webmaster, speak to your IT team, speak to all the content people. And yes, it is all fully customizable and you can do what you want. But we've got the guidance to tell you what links you can put in there and how it's all tied together to enable that infrastructure to work, to enable you to link to different bits of content. So whether you do it your own way or whether you go via a solution partner, there's probably an element of configuration and customization available to make it truly your own. So with that in mind, we're releasing some guidance shortly as to, if you speak to a solution partner, they're each able to help you with this particular element of implementing these QR codes. But if you prefer to do it yourself, here's how you do the URI bit, which Craig talks about. Here's how you implement it within a QR code and how big and what color. And here's how you link it to all this wonderful online content you might want it to as well. So all these different moving parts, we'll be telling you how to do that.
And if I may add very quickly on that, the good news is as you get more granular with your data elements, it allows you to update the landing page. So actually you can make a product today, if you've got a fairly granular, so it's by batch or expiry, actually if some of the ingredient information changes for the next batch, you can have a dedicated landing page, which means you can actually have all of that hosted. If the source of the raw materials for that batch has changed from the previous batch, that can all change dynamically, and actually you can update it as you go. So again, once the product's left the factory, that can still continue to evolve.
So thank you very much for that. I'd just like to say thank you again to Craig for joining us. Really helpful insight there. So in conclusion, we recommend for your next steps, just consider, we need this to be collaborative. You need to make sure solutions are capable and compliant. So you're going to need to speak to external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. So we really do recommend you get cracking and, please engage with us. Most of you are GS1 UK members, so reach out for help, insight, guidance, and of course, speak to your solution partners like Domino and all the other GS1 UK partners listed on our website. So just to reiterate, we're not finished here. We've got a couple more webinars coming up in the near future on regulations and accessibility. So please come along to those. And if you've missed any of our previous webinars, we do have recordings on our website. So go back and revisit those. Well, it's been lovely speaking to you this morning. Thank you for all the questions. If you do have anything else that cropped up and we didn't get around to answering today, then drop us an email to qr@gs1uk.org. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Craig, and happy barcoding.
Thanks all. Thanks, Ben.
Yes, go.